Well, good morning or good afternoon wherever you are. This is Chris Daw here. We're going to get started with the webinar in just a moment. We're just waiting for a few more people to get logged in and joining us. But welcome to all of you that are here. Okay, well, I think we'll get ourselves going here. It's Chris Daw here, and welcome to all of you that have joined our Canada in Motion webinar this morning, our October update and report from all of the good happenings in Victoria last week. Happy to have all of you joining us today, or of course this is going to be recorded, so some of you may be listening in the recording later on. And welcome to all of you, and thank you for your continued interest and engagement in what we're trying to do here with Canada in Motion. Really happy to have you along as we all together continue to build our home. And joining me today on the actual call, we've got Stacey Hall, who is our NERSA president at the moment. So welcome, Stacey.
Oh. Thank you, Chris. It's great to be with you today.
Thanks, Stacey. Sorry I put you on the spot there. You probably had it on mute, but thank you. And we've also got Kathleen Hatch, who continues to be our advocate for the CCRA and helping work on this project, and certainly helped along by Precor. So welcome, Kathleen.
Hey, thanks, Chris. It's great to be with everybody today.
Great. And as I said, again, a big thank you to our partners, Precor, who have helped to put some funding behind this project for us, and we are certainly using their money well, and I think we're moving a number of things forward a long ways. So this morning, as we get going here, this is what our agenda looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about where we have been in the last couple of months since we were on our last webinar in August, and we'll do that looking at our version 2.0 of Canada in Motion. So you would have seen the document when it came out in the invite for this. And our next piece will be report from Stacey and their NERSA mid-year board meetings. We will talk a little bit about the tenets of a Canadian region of NERSA that were approved at that board meeting. We're going to talk a little bit about the leadership summit that happened there in Victoria as well. A good number of folks joined us in this conversation. And then obviously a little bit of next steps, and we'll wrap it up from there. So without further ado, I will move us along to this is the new version 2.0 of our Canada in Motion poster, flyer, whatever you want to call it. And this is the full version of it, and then I'm going to flip slides here fairly quickly so we zone in on a few pieces of it. The first piece here that you see, and I guess a couple of differences from what was on the first version, really just represents some of the discussions that have happened and some of the kinds of things that we're paying attention to as we move this along. And in the first version we had the old map. Now we're just focusing in on the new map. And obviously this is still yet an assumption because the Canadian region certainly has lots of support moving through the system, but not yet approved. But this is what it would look like, a Canadian region of NERSA. And one subtlety that you're going to see in this is that there's red all across Canada, but one of the sets of discussions we've had are some of the uniquenesses in different areas of Canada as well. So you can kind of see some subtle shades of red there from the West, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes especially, as we've had different conversations across all of those areas and realizing, well, or at least confirming that there are some uniquenesses that we need to address as we figure out how to put together this new region of NERSA. The piece here that you see that comes from the poster is just, again, another little subtle signal of the movement that's happening. And as you know, all of us are members of the Canadian Campus Rec Association, and some of us are members of NERSA. And really this movement of sort of starting to phase out or fade out a little bit, I guess, the prominence of the CCRA. And the graphic designers at NERSA headquarters created this new logo with the Canadian maple leaf and the NERSA guy, and we've started to use that on everything. And so, again, just a little bit of a symbolism of the movement towards this connection of everything we're doing in Canada within NERSA now. The outcomes that are listed on the poster here, they're the same outcomes that were on the first version, but the order is a little bit different, and that really represents what we heard from many of you who responded to the survey back in August, telling us what are the most important outcomes. So we've ordered them in priority order from what you've told us so far. And I think in ongoing conversations since then, that's been confirmed, and we're certainly working towards making sure that these are the kinds of outcomes that are going to happen through the course of this work. And of course, a reminder that this work is much more than just becoming a region of NERSA. This work is really about Canadianizing a Canadian region of NERSA and making sure that we have the most impact for all of us involved in this as we move forward. The Stronger Together piece, similarly, we have very similar bullet points from the first version. There are a few edits to it. I won't go through them in detail, but you'll also see, again, some reordering, and certainly the top three that are a little bit bolded. Those were the ones that came out from the survey from our CCRA members saying, you know, these are the ones that we relate to the most and feel like are the most important. And again, in some of the different conversations with stakeholders, it may look a little different depending on who that stakeholder is. But so we certainly didn't want to lose any of these because they're all still important depending on the perspective. But we can look at the priorities as we start to move forward with some of our strategies and continue to hold to the top priorities for our members. This slide has a few updates to it, but again, fairly similar. And we divided this slide and the next slide coming, and there are two buckets on the poster there. This is our group of stakeholders, the partners, or at least the key ones that we're in conversation with now and trying to figure out how we create those partnerships really strong. And so these are some of those Canadian entities that we would want to connect with as we create this Canadian region of NERSA. And you know, we think we've done a pretty good job with some of them, and you know, certainly got some connections in with our athletics colleagues and our caucus colleagues and the Parks and Rec. As we are on this webinar right now, I'm actually sitting at the Alberta Recreation and Parks Association conference in Jasper, so I'm going to be working on that connection this weekend. So the CUPECA one, reminder, that's sort of the deans of phys ed and CNEAS, and those are some of the folks that, again, we've engaged in some conversation, need to get a little bit further, as we do with some of these other ones as well. And perhaps one of the ones that's the most new on this list and where there's been some really interesting connection recently is Participaction. And we can talk about that a little bit more as we go, but you know, one of the things that's very interesting as we create this Canadian region of NERSA, we could be doing that in the 150th year of Canada. And Participaction has done some cool stuff, and they're working on some really cool stuff about the 150 activities. Encourage you to look for that and go in and vote for your favorite activity for the 150th. This slide is now grouped with really, again, some of those same stakeholders, but it's the frameworks that are being used within those stakeholder groups. And again, when you get the latest version, we will send out the webinar recording along with the version of the poster and some of the other materials. These will all be linked so that, again, you can make sure you can get in there. If you haven't had a chance to review, on the top right there is the National Recreation Framework, a Canadian National Recreation Framework, and there's certainly some really good conversation around that and how do we play a role there. Obviously the Sport for Life and the other ones here as well. So, again, encourage you to continue to take a look at those, figure out how it works for you in your programs and on your campuses, and then continue the conversation about how we as a collective should be connecting in with these different frameworks. So I'm going to pass it over to Stacy now, who's going to give us some updates on the NERSA Board of Directors mid-year meetings that were held in Victoria in conjunction with the Summit and the Western Canada Campus Rec Conference. Stacy?
Great, thanks, Chris. It's kind of nice that you finished up that segment right there with all the different partners that have been actively engaged in this effort, because it was really great to see so many of them participating in the WCCRC, and I know the board members really appreciated the opportunity to get to meet some of those folks and to learn about some of the different connections that could be made over time. So that was one of the really exciting components of participating in the WCCRC. So what took place last week is, I'm just really appreciative that the board typically has a mid-year meeting in the fall, and we were able to align that with the WCCRC thanks to some flexibility of some colleagues, and it really worked out great because I know for me it was fun to meet up with some colleagues, but then to meet a lot of new folks, and especially it was fun to see so many students actively engaged in the conference as well. But to get back to really the Board of Directors meeting, which took place just prior to the WCCRC, the board the last couple of years, when we meet in a different location that we've never met at before, we spend some time getting to learn a bit about the culture of the area, which typically involves food, which is always a good thing, but then also other elements of culture as well. So we started our meetings actually by taking a facilitated tour of the BC Parliament, which was really educational and actually just a beautiful facility. So that was great. If you're ever back in BC, I would definitely check the Parliament out. Maybe that should be one of my goals, is to check out the rest of the parliaments in Canada, but that's a personal goal, not a goal that we have for for this effort. So I wanted to give a little background. Before the board met in Victoria, in a meeting prior to that, we passed a motion to submit to the members to change the bylaws, because for those of you who've been engaged in this process, you know that the request is that a Canadian region gets created within the NERSA structure. And as the board looks at the kind of the rules that we're playing by right now, those bylaws are very detailed, and any change to those bylaws requires a full vote of all members to make any kind of change. And so as we start thinking about that, and you think about, sometimes these decisions don't impact all of the members. So how relevant is it for us to have all of our members vote on every single change to regions? And so rather than have that kind of detail within the bylaws, the proposal is to take all of that detail out of the bylaws, so then it's in a policy manual that the board manages. And that allows us to be a lot more nimble and not just wait for a full vote of all members, which obviously in order to have a full vote of all members, you have to have a pretty good education and communication plan to help them make an informed decision. That a vote would be focused on all of the members that are impacted by the potential change. So when you start to hear more about this potential vote of the bylaws, you are not going to see a proposal that says Canada should be a region of NERSA. So you won't see the word Canada in any of the proposed changes, because the goal is to have that level of detail out. So the proposed changes is about moving the regions, and then we have the process next to it. So that's what the upcoming vote of the members will be about, which takes place in January. So since we took action on that prior to getting to Victoria, when we were in Victoria, we focused on some other elements around that, such as the communication plan to help all NERSA members understand why we're having this vote and what the implications are, so that folks will vote in favor of the proposed changes. We also, let's see, I was trying to make sure I had everything about the bylaws vote shared with you. So hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of a little bit hard to describe verbally, but there are some resources on the NERSA website that might be helpful for you if you'd like to delve into that a little bit more. So in addition to focusing on the communication plan, we also had the proposal from the group that here on the tenets of the Canadian region, and so the board took action on that and adopted those tenets. And as you read through those tenets, for those of you who are NERSA members, you'll probably recognize in there that many of the existing elements of NERSA's own vision, mission, and values is really embedded within the tenets. It's just that there's also some kind of Canadian-specific elements as well, and I know Kathleen will talk a little bit more about that, but it was because we're all aligned with the same goals, it made it pretty easy for the board to adopt the tenets that were proposed. So there were no changes made to that proposal. So then the other element that the board has been focused on as well is to try to connect with colleagues in Canada that have not been engaged with NERSA before. And so, participating in something like the WCCRC is a great start. But then developing folks who'd like to become members, perhaps attend our annual conference, like this year is going to be in February in Washington, D.C. We have a plan for that as well, about how we can connect with folks and help people see how participating in a professional association like NERSA can help you in your career and even just sometimes in your day-to-day job. So we are, as we speak, continuing to revise some financial incentives to help encourage folks from Canada who maybe have not been to a NERSA conference before or haven't been in a while to help you attend the annual conference this February right outside of Washington, D.C. And in addition to financial incentives, there's an intentional effort as well to build upon, a typical conference includes a lot of different professional development topics for all aspects of campus recreation, but we're being intentional about having a couple Canadian-specific sessions that would help to justify attending the conference this February. So keep an eye out for that. And I hope to see many of you again in February. It was great to see so many folks last week in Victoria, and look forward to seeing many more of you in February. So I think I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen next, right?
Hey, thanks, Stacy. And let me just say that it was absolutely a delight to be with you and the board, and for Chris and I to spend some time in discussions and really on behalf of the CLT bring forward these tenets for the board's consideration and adoption. And we will be sharing this electronically with everybody after the webinar, but we wanted to just share a bit because it points to a significant moment in all this effort and this journey that, and as Stacy referenced, we're clearly on the foundation of NERSA, building off of common and fully aligned mission and strategic values. But knowing that at the same time this was a time for the Canadian, as the CCRA, the informal network for Canada, moves forward into a formal relationship with NERSA, that how to have almost a promissory note of engagement and guiding principles for decisions, and with all of the conversations that are taking place in Canada, it just became clear that, you know, here, yes, I mean, sorry, you'll see here on the first page of this that it was really important to articulate the common mission, and next the values that we all hold, and you know, some of these were, as the tenets were developed with the Canadian leadership team, you know, it was clear that we wanted to make sure that these were stated, because these are clear values in Canada as well. And obviously this vision here for you know, the healthy communities worldwide, that it was clear that, you know, we've got some reciprocity of learning together, and that we can in fact, you know, be stronger in this vision statement for NERSA. But specifically now, you know, just diving into a few of the tenets just to highlight here. Yes, this one here. I'll just highlight a couple of things. You know, we had some great conversations of how you know, contextual learning, that third bullet, you know, to have the opportunities to maximize learning in place, and that, you know, that although we have much in common professionally and full alignment of our work in a large profession, to have unique learning opportunities in Canada that leverage the talent and the strengths, and also for Canada to have a chance to develop its own voice and to lead the professional chapter for Canada. And again, you'll be able to look at these in full detail after, but we're really very pleased with, you know, the tone and the receptivity of the board to say yes, you know, as we move forward. And clearly, you know, I guess there's a little assumption here that, you know, we're probably going to have a successful vote in January, but that this already then spurs work for this mutually beneficial relationship in the development of all the strategies and actions that will follow. Chris, I think I'll pass it back to you now.
Great, thanks Kathleen, and Stacy as well before that. So this slide here really talks about what did we now do at the Leadership Summit itself. So I'll just talk a little bit about what that actually looked like for those that weren't able to join us. In Victoria, we had invited, prior to the Western Canada Campus Rec Conference on the day last week, we invited a number of folks to join us. So there were certainly a number of our great leaders from, well, really all across the country. We had some of our Canadian leadership team folks, as well as some other folks who have been involved either in the Canadian leadership team before or just engaged in the conversation at different ways. And then we had some of those that we report to, some leaders in recreation and athletics, so some directors of rec and athletics, including our host, Clint Hamilton, there at the University of Victoria, but then a number of others from Western Canada schools that were able to join us. We had the president of Caucus, Pat Pardo, so we had, and a couple of other folks on that student services component. We had a couple of other folks that we had connected with earlier and kind of brought their voice in from the QPICA perspective. And we had a representative from the Alberta Recreation Parks Association board that was able to join us. BC Parks were supposed to be able to join us as well, but unfortunately there was some interesting weather stuff that happened out that way last week that a couple people weren't able to connect. But a really good selection of folks from all of those constituent groups who have different perspectives and can help us shape this vision of where we're going. So we had this group in a room. There was about 45 of us or so, and we had a number, and thank you if there are some of our CLT members that were are listening in right now, thank you to those folks that were able to help facilitate. We did a World Cafe style set of discussions around these 5 topics that you see on the slide here now. And these 5 topics came from the interim report that we had been working on. Really, the Canadian leadership team presented to the NERSA board. But again, a number of folks have seen a few different versions of this and helped us add and edit to get to that point for this summit. And we talked about some of the things that were in really the chapters of that report. And you see them represented within the version 2.0 as well. And some great conversations. This next slide talks about, and really actually this slide came from that summit, and early on in that summit we talked about these being the outcomes that were desired, and I ended up essentially leaving this slide alone for our presentation here today because I think we were actually pretty successful in doing exactly what we intended to do in that leadership summit. We got more people to have a shared understanding of where we are going and why we are wanting to go there and why we need to be going where we're headed. And certainly it helped us broaden the perspectives coming into that strategy. So by having all those stakeholders there, we were able to hear from different perspectives what that meant and what else we might need to be considering. So we captured pages and pages of notes from all of those conversations that again help us see all those different things that will then be built into the final report. So we're working towards a final report for this project in December, and or it might be sort of finalized in December, January, somewhere in that time frame, but that's what we're working towards. We've got some initial thoughts and then all of the additional input, including from those that are on the call here today and what you see and what you can now feed to us after this as well. The third bullet there, building key relationships. So we do believe that moved along as well. That was an important part for us to connect to some of our, for instance, Parks and Rec colleagues or our CIS or CCAA colleagues, and we've been working on that obviously over the last 8 months or so, but again, some of those things really came strongly into this summit. We hopefully were able to engage a few more folks in helping to lead this process. One thing that I think will come as a good message to everyone listening in, this can't be and will never be the Chris Daw Show. This needs to be a whole bunch of great leaders in Canada, and I think we are absolutely moving that forward now. We've got a lot more voices. We've got a lot more people working on pieces of this than we had, say, 8 months ago. We've got a really strong set of leaders who are engaged and working together as a team to move this process forward, and we'll need to continue to involve more leaders. And one of those things we ended up, as we talked through in a larger panel session with the entire conference on the Friday morning, some students were speaking up. We had a great, about 45 students at the Western Canada Campus Rec Conference, so they got to see some of the panelists from these different leadership groups, including Stacy, who was on our panel there. And there were some questions around, how could they get involved and what would that look like? And that was fantastic to see, because we do need to engage more of our students as we move all of this stuff along. Certainly collective strategies and actions, so talking through some of the stuff that have been proposed, and I think everyone's really thrilled to see the tenets be adopted by the NERSA board, and what can then follow from those tenets in terms of the actual strategies and actions that many of us are going to pick up pieces of, including NERSA headquarters, NERSA board, other NERSA members and colleagues, and then certainly the Canadian leadership team and other CCRA members. And then the last bullet here, kind of goes to this whole topic, and that is that we are just starting. And there's been some really, really cool momentum over these last, I'd say, 6-8 months, and the conversations and the doors that we are opening are fantastic, but it is just a beginning. And I believe we made some progress last week at this summit, and even continuing on through the rest of the conference with the attendees there. Some fantastic conversations, such energizing conversations, and I believe we increased the level of momentum in the people that are around this table now. One of the things we said as we were wrapping up the leadership summit was that our team just got bigger, and we thanked all of them for engaging, and then we asked them for more. And we're going to ask all of you listening in now for more. We I guess I'll actually I'm going to pop by that one for a second. Back to, whoops, I missed my slide there. Sorry about that. So we're gonna ask you for your help in spreading the word, your help in providing feedback to what we are working on and what you believe we should be working on that we might be missing at this point. And engage one more person or two more people, and we grow this network that much more. So this slide, as I flip to here, was sort of that, what are the next steps? Well, the next steps, we're in them right now. In October there, we've got the Canadian region tenants adopted. We're working through sort of prioritizing, and so we got, like I said, lots of notes from last week, so stay tuned. We'll be communicating out some more of those in the next little while here. But we certainly want your input as well to all of you listening. Certainly this outreach and engagement, Stacy talked about it from a NERSA perspective. There will be some, I would say, coordinated and connected messaging. So there will be the messaging to NERSA members, and then there will be messaging to our CCRA members that will be complementary and continue spreading the word really from our CLT perspective as well. But it's also about, again, everyone listening, feeding information back in. We don't want this to be a one-way conversation. We want it to be both ways. So you see there in December the final report. In January, the bylaws vote that we've been talking about, and certainly more activation. And activation is ongoing, but certainly the start of that. And assuming a positive vote in January, and we are all optimistic that that will be the case, then that really is just the start of the next phase. There's a lot of work to be done between January and May, for instance, when a new Canadian leadership structure would be activated as part of the member network, and that there's a number of pieces obviously leading into the conference itself, and that's, I guess, the other thing we didn't really list on this timeline, but is, or sorry, we did in February there, this celebration. Hopefully we'll be celebrating a new Canadian region at the annual conference, and we're going to want all of you there. We're going to want, and you can, as Stacy alluded to a little bit, there will hopefully be some pretty cool incentives to get not only you, because I would expect many of the people listening in, maybe some of the ones who have been to a NERSA conference before. Hopefully we're going to get a whole bunch more. We've been bold at the end of the conference. We were very bold in talking about, hey, let's get 200 Canadians to the NERSA annual conference, and I think it's absolutely doable, and it would be an incredible celebration. And we're going to work through making sure that we've got some more Canadian content there. So we're working with NERSA headquarters now on that piece. and I believe it'll be, we're going to look for other ways to get more people there, and helping getting more people there. So, so stay tuned for that one for sure. But start making your plans, hopefully. And then in May, the Canadian region would officially begin, assuming obviously things go well in January. The Eastern Canada Campus Rec Conference is first part of May. Atlantic meeting somewhere around that timeline or a little bit later. There's caucus that happens in June in Ottawa. We're going to hope to create some real momentum there. Looking at the CCAA and CIS meetings again in that time period as well. So lots of different pieces that are going to get activated and take that next step as we go. So this slide I've kind of talked a little bit about already. So what do we want from you? If this is Canada in motion, what is your motion? What are the things that we're asking of you to advocate? So as I said, talk to more of the folks on your campus who aren't currently listening in. Send them the link to this webinar recording. Send them the link to sign up and subscribe to be a CCRA member. And then send them some NERSA information. Encourage them to read, to look at what the value is, and talk about the value with them. To become more engaged in this process. We do want more people involved and more perspectives. Advocate also talks about, talking to your boss. And are there some materials that you need to do that? Can we put the value of Campus Rec, the value of professional development, the value of looking at the competencies, for instance? Are there some things that we can talk about in terms of the value of this network and what we're doing here with those on your campus? Can you do that with your boss? Can you, and if your boss is one of our stakeholders, can you do that with the other stakeholders? Can you do that with your wellness folks on your campus, your student affairs folks on your campus? Are there other connections there that you can have this conversation with and talk about where we're headed, why we're going there, and why it's important? Certainly, we've said it a couple of times, we do want you to be joining that celebration in DC, and there's the information there, February 21st to 24th, and we would love to see all of you there and have all of you bring 2 or 3 other people with you. Hey, can you be a NERSA member? We want you to be a CCRA member, and we assume you actually are already, but get some more folks to be CCRA members. But then if you're not a current NERSA member, can you be a NERSA member? Can you advocate for that, for funding for that? Obviously, the vote in January, as long as you are a NERSA member at the time that that voting begins, it'll be right around that first week of January. As long as you're a NERSA member at that point, you're going to be able to cast a ballot. And that ballot will certainly be for leaders throughout NERSA, but it'll also be for this bylaws vote. And we would love to see you contribute to that being successful. So that essentially wraps up what we had to present to you today. And we wanted to make sure that we left some time in here to take any questions, comments, feedback. And so I'll pause right now and ask Emily if we have any that have been written in. But then also Emily's going to unmute the line here. And if anyone wants to just speak up and ask a question, please by all means do that. You can ask any one of us, Stacy, Kathleen, myself, or Emily there in headquarters. We'll be able to answer whatever we can. Emily, anything there?
There's no written questions, but I'm going through and
So at school, this is the best time. The school was accepted. No, it's all like.
Oh, sorry. I'm just on a webinar, but I'm not speaking.
So I don't
Okay.
get everyone.
So
If you have a question, you can put that, but if you don't, then you can mute yourself.
Okay, so our lines are now open, obviously. So if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to jump in now.
Okay.
If you're not talking, perhaps mute yourself so that we can make sure everyone can hear who's talking.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye. Okay.
The unmuting may not quite work. Anybody have anything for us? Okay, so Emily, anything else that's been written in there?
Not at this time, Chris.
Okay. Well, again, I guess I will take that as a good sign. If we don't have questions
Oh,
that have provided the information that people want.
Chris,
Oh,
it's Emily, a couple
someone-
questions just came through. So
Okay.
Ryan would like to know where ECCRC is at. He's asking if it's going to be at York again this year or if there's a new location.
So right now things are just being finalized for, I believe, the first week in May in Windsor. So Sandra Andraka and the team there are our host committee, and there's a group of folks in Ontario and Quebec that have been talking about program and getting started on all that. I would just say stay tuned, and we'll hopefully have some more details for you really within the next probably month or so. But you know, pencil in that first week of May in Windsor.
All right. And then, oh, and Peter Mumford is just saying that it will be the week of May 15th.
Perfect. Thanks for that clarification, Peter.
Yep. And Jenna is asking if there's any funding sources for NERSA if they were told that it's not in their budget.
So, Stacy, you want to take a shot at that first from NERSA perspective?
Yeah, sure. That's actually a great question because sometimes the financial be a hurdle to get through, especially if you don't have it budgeted. But there are some scholarship options that are provided. Sorry about that. I was muted there for a bit. So it's a great question about financial opportunities, and there are some scholarships available through the NERSA Foundation. Almost all of them are merit-based, but there's also, and they typically cover the registration fee itself. There is a travel scholarship as well that covers more than that. I don't recall the deadlines off the top of my head. Maybe Emily at headquarters could provide that. But there is information available for that on the NERSA website, and it's typically just a form for you to fill out for consideration. And oftentimes there's opportunities both at the NERSA association level and then also within your current region. So some folks in Canada are part of Region 1 or Region 3, so take a look at what region you currently are a part of to see what other kind of support there is at the regional level. I'm not sure if there's any at the provincial level. Are you aware of any, Chris? Oh, he might be having trouble with the mute too.
Stacey, this is Emily. The scholarships and stipends application just passed for NERSA as a whole this last Monday on the 17th. But there are some, especially I know for sure in Region 1, that those aren't due, I don't think, until January or close to the year end. So those are out there for folks to apply for.
Okay, thank you for that more current information.
Chris, are you there?
it's Kathleen. I think the only other, excuse me, the thing I'd offer is if there's someone out there who is working on, potentially their rationale or their justification for a travel request, to reach out to Chris or I. You've got Chris's email right here on the screen, because it is something that we are aware of, that obviously as much as we've talked about a celebration in DC, this is a substantive professional development opportunity, and we want to be able to articulate the ROI for you as an individual and back to your department. And we know that depending on organizational alignments and reporting structures in Canada, that there really is very effective ways to talk specifically about the benefits that you can bring back. So we want to engage with you if that's a barrier that we can help with as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I was just thinking of another potential opportunity that often varies between institutions, but sometimes there's travel funding support available within an institution, and sometimes they're not promoted super well, so that might be something to take a look at on your campus to see if there's a way to get some subsidy there too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For students, there's often the undergraduate students or graduate student associations, and as well sometimes for professionals.
Emily, did you have another question too? I feel like you didn't get through that full list.
No, that was the list. Just on a side note, Jenna, Peter Mumford said to reach out to him and he can help you with your business case for your supervisor. But other than that, that's all the questions that I have in here for now.
Well, listen, I think we have lost Chris's connection. So I just want to, on behalf of all of us today, thank everyone again for their time. Know that this recording will be again available soon if any of your colleagues missed that, and we will get out the tenets that have been adopted to you electronically, as well as the version 2.0 with the live links to all of the resources and partners. So we again, thanks very much for your time, and we look forward to our next chapter with you. Stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.